Good evening, everyone. I am going to get us started because it is 7 o'clock and just going to start with a little um, introduction. So, thank you so much for joining us. I'm honored to welcome you tonight to Fair Housing Matters, a whole community conversation. I'm Liz Hibino, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Portland Social Justice Coalition, along with April Graves and Erin Leibensberger. Portland Social Justice Coalition is a grassroots organization that was formed last summer in response to protests and conversations about systemic racism. Our mission is to identify the needs of our community by listening, learning, and having the difficult conversations necessary to empower our fellow community members to raise their voices and begin to bridge the gaps to create a more equitable, inclusive community. To that end, one of our goals is offering events such as this, where community members can learn together and have conversations about important issues such as fair and inclusive housing. We're very excited that the Town of Portland and Portland Library are co-sponsoring this event with us. The program is being recorded tonight and will be available on the Town of Portland's YouTube channel or by emailing us at portlandsocialjustice@gmail.com. We'll also be transcribing the session tonight. And I want to note that this is our first panel event, and so we thank you in advance for your patience if we have any technical difficulties. So now one of our committee members, Christy, is going to introduce our moderator, and we will get started with the program. Christy, you're still muted.
Right now. How's that? Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Our moderator tonight is Jeff Pugliese. Jeff serves as Vice President at the Middlesex County Chamber of Congress in Middletown, Connecticut. The Middlesex Chamber is a dynamic business organization with over 1,800 members. It represents businesses of all sizes and from all industry sectors, from large corporations to micro businesses and entrepreneurs. Jeff serves as a staff liaison to many of the Chamber's industry-specific committees and country and county-based divisions. He oversees many of the Chamber's workforce development programs, coordinates legislative and municipal relations, and serves as an administrator of the Middlesex County Revitalization Commission, a revolving loan fund that assists small businesses in the region. Jeff has also served as a staff liaison of the Chamber's Affordable Housing Committee since its inception in 2007. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Christy, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jeff Pugliese. It's truly an honor for me to serve as moderator this evening. I appreciate that kind introduction. We always say here at the Chamber that we are a business organization first and foremost, of course. That's our charge, that's our charter. But we also say every day that we strive to be a community organization, and we really are thrilled to be part of the Portland community. We want to support your efforts every single day, and we're happy to be here tonight with you. So it's certainly my honor to kick the forum off tonight. We look forward to an excellent discussion. We have an outstanding panel planned for you this evening, so bear with us, and we're going to get through it and have a really, really productive discussion this evening. So now to kick us off here, it's my honor to introduce Robbie Hill to be our first speaker this evening. He is the partnerships coordinator for Desegregate Connecticut. Desegregate is a coalition of neighbors and nonprofits who believes in creating abundant, diverse housing in service of equity, inclusive prosperity, and a cleaner environment. Desegregate Connecticut believes that we, as a coalition and a group, can desegregate our state by expanding housing diversity, increasing housing supply, and improving the development process. They work every day to educate, research, and enrich and advocate in service of change. So it's now my pleasure to yield the floor to Robbie Hill. Robbie, good evening.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening to you. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's always a pleasure to get to go out, if it's virtually, and meet people. I haven't had the pleasure of visiting Portland, but I got to look at some pictures in preparation for this event, and it looks absolutely beautiful. So I can't wait to take a trip sometime soon. I prepared a PowerPoint that I'd love to share with everyone. And if you can see the screen, we can get underway in a second. Good. So as Jeff mentioned, Desegregate Connecticut is a research and advocacy group. And I'm going to go through the timeline a little bit later on, but we host a series of events designed for the public and also meet with legislators, and we write law all around this one issue of zoning and land use reform, which, as I'll talk about further, can have some segregatory and exclusionary effects. But you can see we're a coalition of nearly 70 organizations from across the state and some that are more local. And together as this group of organizations, we've crafted a piece of legislation that is now mostly encapsulated in Senate Bill 1024 before the Senate very shortly. These are some of our coalition members. You might recognize a number of them are large statewide groups like the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, the American Planning Association, Connecticut Chapter, Regional Plan are both professional organizations that are working for land use reform. And then you'll also see environmental groups like the Sierra Club and many more local groups like Portland Social Justice Coalition. We have the Hebron Coalition on Diversity and Equity, Simsbury's Holding the Door Open, and the Old Saybrook March for Justice are just a few that come to mind. I talked about the timeline of Desegregate Connecticut, and I think it's impossible to separate the Black Lives Matter protests of last June from the organization's founding. So in June, following George Floyd's death, Professor Sarah Bronin, who's a professor of law at UConn, came together and assembled a number of architects and planners to talk about some of the ways that our state zoning codes have had an exclusionary effect in certain towns. And then they convened and designed a series of proposals for the July special session, which unfortunately did not go to the floor. But over the past 7 or 8 months since then, we've been working to revamp those proposals, receive additional input, and revise them for now Senate Bill 1024, which encapsulates most of our proposals throughout the past year. Senate Bill 1024 is currently before the Senate. It just received its Office of Legislative Research report, where it sort of explains in plain terms what the legislation does. But now we are pushing state senators and state representatives to enact this bill. I want to talk about a few goals for today, and that's first to identify some of the problems that arise from exclusionary zoning, to learn about Desegregate TT's platform and about Senate Bill 1024, and specifically to see how Portland can serve as a model for zoning reform, and to see how Senate Bill 1024 might affect the town of Portland. Before we do that, I'd like to ground a little bit of our conversation in the history of suburban segregation in Connecticut and throughout the state. And for those of you who've read Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, it's a tremendous book that talks about the history of and the intentionality of residential segregation in the United States. But a brief synopsis is that throughout the 20th century, the government at the local, state, and federal level instituted a series of policies that were designed to separate Black people and white people for a host of reasons, all of them, however, racially bigoted. And Black people, as a consequence of particularly being denied access to the suburbs that were emerging in the 1950s and onward, lost out on the decades of home equity appreciation that many white families used to move themselves up through the middle class and then often to provide payment for college education for their children. And so that really explains why across the United States, Black and Hispanic people, their incomes tend to be about 60% that of white families, but Black and Hispanic wealth is about 10% that of white wealth. It's largely to do with this discrepancy in wealth that white families were able to acquire through the appreciation in their homes. And obviously, today, racially explicit housing practices are outlawed. That was true following the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. But in their place, a number of towns have managed to entrench wealth through a series of policies that we like to refer to broadly as exclusionary zoning. And what exclusionary zoning is that it's land use practices that are intended often to limit housing supply and to drive up home prices. It typically involves blocking certain types of housing that are naturally more affordable. So things like duplexes and mid-sized buildings and apartment buildings, and also by setting unreasonably high standards for development, often in the form of high minimum lot acreage requirements or with very onerous review processes in order to undergo a development. So exclusionary zoning is a big part of the reason that Connecticut's housing stock is too limited and too homogenous. And I'll explain on both of those two terms going forward, but I just want to offer a little bit of justification. So Connecticut is currently dead last in the entire country in housing production. And there's a lot of disagreement over why this is, but the fact of the matter remains that we lag behind many of our neighboring states like Rhode Island, we lag behind other cities, and especially the entire country. And not only are we last in home production, but we're also not creating housing at the same rate that our population is growing. So Connecticut saw an only 1% increase in population, yet still we had a 30% reduction in the home development rate. And obviously these two issues feed into one another, but the fact of the matter remains, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, that there is demand for housing in Connecticut, and often such high demand that we're unable to supply that housing. And as a coalition, one of the major research projects that we embarked on last September was to catalog and record each of Connecticut's 2,622 zoning districts, and to see what kind of information we could gather from. And so the result of that project was the Connecticut Zoning Atlas. And what that atlas told us was what percentage of land was zoned for certain criteria. So here on the slide, you can see that everywhere that's shaded in purple is where single family housing is permitted as of right. And you're probably going to hear me use that term quite a bit. You'll probably hear Mary use that term as well. And as of right just means not requiring a review process or a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So obviously 9 out of 10 little patches in the state are zoned for single family housing as of right. And that's compared to just 2.2% for 4+ family housing. It's a massive discrepancy, and honestly, by virtue of its size and because it's not a standalone property, 4+ family housing tends to be more affordable. And so by restricting that kind of housing, you're often restricting affordable housing. There are a number of consequences of exclusionary zoning. It's a pretty linear relationship. So by driving down the housing supply and by driving up prices, you are forcing certain people, typically poor and middle income people, out of high income communities. And because of the concept of generational wealth that's talked about in the color of law, it's typically Black and Hispanic people who are more poor or more middle income. And so as a result, we end up with towns that are segregated along income lines, especially, but also along racial lines de facto. And a little bit more motivation for this. So segregation in Connecticut, as we probably all know, is bad. In fact, it's typically cited as either the most or the second most segregated place in the country, depending on what study you look at. But we do know that Fairfield County is the most income segregated place in the country. That's the Bridgeport, Norwalk, Stamford metro area. And we also know that 70% of Connecticut's Black population lives in just 17 different municipalities out of 169 towns in the state. So it's a tremendous problem. And it's one for which our coalition wanted to offer a solution. And that part of that solution is we need. So as I talk about desegregate CT's proposals and the provisions in SB 1024, I want you to sort of think about how these proposals benefit our state from 3 angles. And that's from an equity perspective, an economic perspective, and from an environmental perspective. So I'll walk you through, as I said, many of the provisions in Senate Bill 1024, and we'll cover 4 of them or 3 of them today, and those will be accessory dwelling units, reduced parking mandates, and the word character in zoning codes. And we're also going to talk a little bit about proposals that were originally in Senate Bill 1024, but have since been removed by the Planning and Development Committee. And those are housing on main streets and transit-oriented development. So first, talking about accessory dwelling units, what are those? So accessory dwelling units are sometimes called granny apartments, sometimes called in-law apartments. And you can see on the image to the top left, the orange is the ADU. And it's essentially a secondary apartment that is either attached or detached to a single family dwelling. And we know from the zoning atlas and from Mary and the other town planners' work that accessory dwelling units, attached accessory dwelling units, those that are attached to a single family home, are actually permitted on almost 80% of land in Portland. It's true across a number of zoning districts, but what's great about ADUs is that they offer diverse housing options in existing single family districts, often without having a big adjustment to the architectural features of the community. So under SB 1024, the only thing that would change would be that detached accessory dwelling units would exist, and also that they would exist in that 20% of the town that doesn't currently permit them, or 20% of if there are any residential districts that don't currently permit them. There are also a little bit more reasons to permit ADUs, and probably one of the most noteworthy ones is that ADUs can increase property values by up to 50%. They're seen as attractive living units, particularly for the elderly who are looking to downsize, or for young people who are looking to move out of their parents' homes. And as I said before, they're a great step for increasing housing diversity in single family districts. Another proposal that's talked about in SB 1024 is parking mandates. And parking mandates, for those who are unfamiliar, set minimum parking requirements for residences or for businesses. They are not maximums. That's an important distinction to make. If you see a 2-space minimum parking requirement, that is saying that in order to construct a building, that developer has to provide two or more off-street parking spaces. And so if we look at the town of Portland, for both 1-2 family dwellings and 3+ family dwellings, they require 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit. So SB 1024 would have a very modest change and reduce this to 2 spaces for a 2+ bedroom unit and 1 space for a 1-bedroom unit, a loft, or an ADU. It's a very modest proposal. And again, I'll offer some motivation for why this is important. And the first one I think actually will resonate with Jeff and the other members of the Business Association. And that's that parking mandates are kind of inherently going against free market principles. They're imposing ceilings on, or excuse me, floors on what developers have to offer. And it's often just better to let the free market decide how much parking to allocate, right? It could be that a minimum parking requirement is 1 space, but that the developers decides that they actually need to provide 2 or 3, and they're welcome to do that. We just shouldn't be requiring more parking when it's not necessary. And that's because parking prevents us from having green space. It increases runoff, and it increases auto dependence, because we know from a number of research studies that having off-street parking available makes people more likely to own and use cars. So I also talked about this idea of character in zoning codes, and here you're going to see the purpose of the Portland zoning codes. And number 8, as you can see, is to give consideration to the character of each area and its peculiar suitability for particular uses. This language is common among many zoning codes in Connecticut's towns and in other states as well. And it would be a very modest change under SB 1024 to simply replace character with architectural site characteristics and historical context. And I think that's what character is supposed to intend to mean. But the problem is that character often ends up getting used to talk about the character of the people who would occupy a proposed development, less than the actual architectural features of the development itself as it's intended. So by changing character to something more explicit and more legally defined, we're giving clearer standards for architects, and we're also eliminating the opportunity for bias in permitting processes. And lastly, I said I would talk about what we lost in SB 1024 and why it should come back, in my opinion. And the first thing I'll talk about is Main Street upzoning. So I'm going to throw that word upzoning around a little bit. And what that just means is increased density zoning. So for instance, going from single family to 2 family, or going from 2 family to 3 family, et cetera. And SB 1024 had a provision that a 1/4 to 3/4 mile strip of a town's main street would have to be zoned for 2 to 4 family housing. Well, the good thing is that Portland already does this along Marlborough Road. In fact, the picture you're seeing there is literally just I dropped down on Google Maps, someone in the middle of Marlborough Road, and those are 2 duplexes. And so while Portland requires a special permit for these kinds of developments, SB 2024 would eliminate that special permit, but still you can see from the road itself that there wouldn't really be much of an impact on the actual types of development that occur here, because again, it's a very modest 2 to 4 unit housing that already exists in that part of town. And there are a number of benefits for Main Street upzoning. I think, again, the first one is that it increases housing diversity. It supplies more housing. It supplies housing for people who don't necessarily want a single family detached home. And it does so in places that have the sewerage capacity to handle increased density development. It also increases foot traffic for small businesses, which is crucial. And again, it's just not that big of a change for Portland and for a number of towns across the state. What we're not talking about is massive apartment complexes. We're talking about a duplex where a single family home could go, which I would argue is good for everyone. And secondly, transit-oriented development is a similar concept, except it's upzoning around transit stations. But in Portland, because they lack, you all lack comprehensive public transit, like a train station or a high-capacity bus station, the TOD proposal that we lost in SB 1024 would never have affected you in the first place. But again, TOD is valuable because it concentrates development where housing already exists. And it provides options for people without cars, encouraging the use of public transit, which we know to be more environmentally friendly. So as I said, you're probably going to hear me talk at some level about the equity impacts of zoning reform, the environmental impacts of zoning reform, and the economic impacts. And TOD and Main Streets are perfect examples of both of those, I think. They increase foot traffic often, they encourage people to live in vibrant downtown areas, and they prevent the kind of residential sprawl that we see from excessive one-size-fits-all single-family zoning across the state that forces us to clear, and this is true, approximately 4 acres of forest and farmland every single day in Connecticut. So I also should say this, right, that I think zoning can tend to be a pretty unapproachable topic for many people. I certainly didn't know a lot about it until my involvement with Desegregate Connecticut. But we're starting to see a lot of increased awareness around this issue. The Biden administration has made it a priority topic to address housing segregation, to address racial and income segregation. And we're also seeing it in our state, where at our public hearing for SB 1024 back in early March, we saw 71% of people who speak in favor, including 100% of young people. And then, since then, we've had dozens and dozens of op-eds in local and statewide publications that have been written in favor of zoning reform, in favor of Desegregate CT's platform. We've also received some significant endorsements, like from Hearst Connecticut Media Group, who runs the New Haven Register and the Connecticut Post and the Greenwich Times, and also The Day, which is another statewide publication. And like I said, there have been countless op-eds about this topic of zoning reform and what it could do for our towns. And to some degree, I'm very appreciative of all the positive messaging. But I think what kind of gets lost in the conversation around zoning reform is that these are incredibly moderate proposals. And I think Portland serves as a prime example of that. I would argue that, as Mary will go on to say, things like having diverse housing, like duplexes, like accessory dwelling units, have only contributed to making Portland's housing stock more diverse, to making it more affordable, and to just generally bringing vibrancy to the town. And so when people talk about reigning apartment complexes, I think that sounds a little bit ridiculous, and I tend instead to think about towns like Portland that have integrated a lot of these proposals really seamlessly. We also have a number of legislative champions. We're currently at 9 co-sponsors for SB 1024, as well as Connecticut Treasurer Sean Wooden and both chairs of the Planning and Development Committee. And this is where I make my appeal as an organizer and as an advocate for Desegregate Connecticut. And I'll tell you that if we want to get more politicians to sign on, they have to hear from us. And so there are a number of ways that we can take action. And the first one that I'll tell everyone to do is to text zoning to 313131. That will sign you up for our informational so that you'll follow the legislative progress of our bill, and you'll receive any crucial updates about potential rallies or events. And then the other thing, and this is all available on our website, desegregatect.org, so don't worry if you don't remember any of it, but to email your legislators, to especially convince them to add back TOD and add back the Main Streets provisions. And then, I don't know why it's doing that. And then to contact Governor Lamont, who has expressed support for zoning reform and has said he's willing to take it on, but who has to receive the kind of political pressure from concerned citizens, from constituents, in order to act favorably. And some last ideas about how you can help out. You can write op-eds or letters to the editor, like the many, many, many you might have seen in your papers if you read the local news. You can organize community rallies just like this one. You can film videos. As always, you can follow us on social media, or you can head to our website. And I think one of the beautiful things about state government is that that's often a place where we can have an actual impact, because representatives and senators care about what you have to say as voters. And I think there's no better issue to get behind than behind zoning reform. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions towards the end.
Thank you very much, Robbie, for those very insightful remarks in your presentation. We appreciate it. You did a really nice job setting the table for us tonight, and we look forward to continuing these important conversations as we move forward. And I know we'll hear more from you later on in the agenda when we get to the question and answer session. So thank you again, Robbie, and sit tight. We'll get back to you. So before we move on to my friend Mary Dickerson here, I do want to note that we have some questions that have been submitted in advance. But if you have a question that you would like posed to our terrific panel, please enter it into the chat portal. You can direct it directly to me, and I will do my best to get it into the conversation this evening. So again, please feel free to utilize the chat portal tonight. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Mary Dickerson. Mary, as many of us know, is Portland's development planner and has worked for the town of Portland in various capacities since 2007. She manages the submission and review process for applications before the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Conservation Commission, and Inland Wetlands Commission. She is also town staff for the Aquifer Protection Agency, Economic Development Commission, and Plan of Conservation and Development Implementation Committee. As development planner, she manages several ongoing projects, including Brainerd Place, a mixed-use development approved for 240 residential units, 116,000 square feet of commercial space, and the adaptive reuse of 3 historic homes. Very cool stuff there, Mary. In addition, she is assisting in the management of the remediation and redevelopment of a 5.2 acre brownfield site along the Connecticut River. On the personal side, Mary has received her BS in Business Administration from the University of St. Joseph and received her International MBA from Central Connecticut State University. Go Devils. She serves on the River Cogs Planning, Regional Planning Committee, and Board of Directors, which I can attest for the Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce. And I can truly attest how effective she is in that role. And finally, she is a member of the American Planning Association and the Connecticut Economic Developers Association. Mary, my friend, great to see you, and it's a pleasure to yield the floor to you this evening.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, and let's see if we can get these slides up. Let's see if we can go to, is this good? Can everybody see them?
Looks good, Mary. You might just want to go to full screen.
Yep. It's not letting me. It's not letting me go to full screen here, so let's
You go to
see.
slideshow.
What about going
Yeah.
to view?
Let's see.
Mary, at the top left,
Yep.
the top left part of the screen, the right icon with a kind of a projector image.
This one.
Yeah, to the right. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to start by giving you our logo. It's painted on the side of the Connecticut River. Come on over, and we mean it. We really try to be a welcoming community. I think we're a good mix of people that have lived here for generations and people that have come because they love what our community offers, the sense of community, the shops, just the sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself. So meeting Connecticut's 10% affordable housing goal is a challenge for any small town. Portland is very lucky. In Middlesex County, there's very few communities that have their own water and sewer. So we have municipal water service as well as a municipal sewer plant, which allows for more density of housing. Since the 1990s, we've had numerous housing developments built that have been completed without an affordable component. Some of those are moderate density, and a lot of them were single family homes. Portland's Planning and Zoning Commission directly addressed affordable housing in 2006, and I want to read to you the statement of purpose that's actually incorporated as part of our zoning regulations. The Town of Portland Planning and Zoning Commission recognizes that economic conditions have made it increasingly difficult for people to obtain housing. In response to the problem, the PZC has adopted this section of the zoning regulations in an attempt to provide needed housing opportunities while retaining the integrity of single-family neighborhoods and the interests of surrounding properties and homeowners. This regulation that they adopted allowed ADUs by right, and it's just what Robbie was talking about. It's the allowance for people to create apartments in their own homes, whether it's for a parent to age in place with a family or for a young person to be able to start their family and live with their parents, or rental income to allow a young family to afford their own home, or an older folk to be able to stay in the house that they've lived in and loved for many decades. So this has been here since 2006, 15 years. We also have an allowance for 2 and 4 family homes, and that includes 4 family conversions. Portland is an old community. We have a lot of larger homes in our downtown area that are just too much maintenance for young families that have smaller numbers of children or young couples. And so the allowance for 4 family conversions, when you want to talk about preserving history and preserving architecture, that really does that. But it also adds to our housing diversity and it adds rental units to the market. And these changes have had an impact. So despite the number of new developments without any affordable component, in 2002, Portland had only 269 units affordable, or 7.62% of that target of 10%. And in 2020, that number had risen to 349, or 8.56% affordable. And that's a 29% increase. Whoops. I want to go to our zoning map. Sometimes visually is the easiest way to see something. So if you look at the solid kind of minty green color there, that's all floodplain. We have the longest border along Connecticut River. And that area is not really buildable for residential use. It's a lot of farmland for us and open space. The area to the right that you see that's bordered in that green and contains those hatch marks, the black and white stripes, is the Massachusetts State Forest. So that land is protected and development is not allowed in that area. We have a forest overlay zone there. And then you'll see various parts through town where you'll see those hatch marks. Great Hill Pond, Kelsey Pond, the Portland Reservoir, Job's Pond. So those again are areas that are watersheds and they're protected by special restrictions where DEP and other state agencies have some control, so they're not as buildable. Down in your lower left-hand corner of the map, you're gonna see a red box, and that encircles Lower Main Street. That represents our Village District Overlay Zone. And that's where businesses and residential uses coexist together. And Village District Design Guidelines, one of the original proposals, were adopted by the town of Portland in 2008. So most red and purple areas for you are going to represent business and industrial zones. So except for that box where we have the coexisting uses, it's really a business zone and not a residential zone. So that finally brings us to the different shades of yellow and white that you see on the map, and those represent our residential zones. The darkest yellow colors represent the highest density. That's where both municipal sewer and water services available, and we have sidewalks that promote connectivity to schools and businesses, to town buildings and parks. And then as you move into the lighter yellow colors and then onto the white, municipal water and sewer service ends, and construction requires installation of private wells and septics, which are more expensive. We have a lot of slopes and rocky terrain out in the country and those watersheds that I mentioned that provide additional complications for development. So I'll just go section by section so you get a better feel for why our zoning is the way it is. So this is the Village District Overlay Zone. And I just put some points down in zoning, as Robbie said, it's boring. So we try to add some photos in here. Brainerd Place in the upper right corner is our mixed use development. That's going to be 238 units. They're market rate apartments, but I did check in with our local real estate agents this week. Our average rental rate in 2019, according to the census, was $1,115. Given the pandemic and the push on housing, that 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit has now gone up to $1,250 to $1,400. But because of our income, that still becomes an affordable unit based on some of those ratios and numbers. So Brainerd Place is going to add more dense housing to our downtown area, but along with more shops and some vibrancy. Below that, you're going to see a picture of the Connecticut Valley School of Music, and you'll notice they have 2 doors next to each other. One is the door to the business, and the other is the door to the upstairs neighbor. And they coexist very well. And one of the benefits of having residential tenants above your business is when your business is closed, your residential tenants are watching out for you. It's a really great coexisting relationship, and it really promotes vibrancy for our businesses downtown. So in our Village District Overlay Zone that runs from the bridge to the post office, we have municipal water and sewer service that allows for additional density. Planning and zoning has eliminated setbacks, so that allows buildings to be closer together. We have public parking, so parking can be waived for units because there's public parking available And we have street furniture. We make sure that we have sidewalks that are maintained and just a sense of community that is there. And having these residential units and commercial units coexist has really been a positive for Portland. We have a couple vacant spaces that look vacant right now, but every single one of our commercial units on Main Street has an active permit and is being renovated. So by July 1, we should have businesses in every one of those spaces. So it's quite an achievement after a pandemic, and it really goes to the vibrancy of that area that we have residential and commercial uses combined that drew people to that area. So we'll go on to our next, which is our 10 zone. These tend to be downtown. Municipal water and sewer is available to all the properties. It's a minimum 10,000 square foot lot size, which is less than a quarter of an acre. And this area is older homes. These previously served as homes for our quarry and manufacturing labor, and construction dates from the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. There are many existing homes that were built as 2, 3, 4, and even 6 family structures, and they're still used that way today. There's a mix of single and multifamily homes, and everyone seems to think that the idea of townhomes is new to community planning. The house that you see here was built in 1880, and it's across the street from an identical twin. On that same street, this is Waverly Avenue, we have a mix of 3-family, 4-family, 2-family, single-family homes, and then some conversions. And the neighborhood is a great little neighborhood. Everyone coexists. You'll notice in that photo that to the right, you can see a garage, another driveway, a peak of a house behind. There's density, but there's also green space. So neighbors are friends. They share garden spaces. They come out and take walks together at night. It really is a great little neighborhood. So ADUs require a minimum of 500 square feet in Portland, 1 parking space per bedroom with a 2-bedroom maximum. There's no restrictions on occupancy. So you're seeing a 2-family house here already, but on the same street, we have single homeowners that have added accessory dwelling units to their properties. So we have full 2 families, and then we have units that have smaller apartments. We'll go to our R15 zone. And so this is as you get a little farther out from downtown. The lots are 15,000 square feet, about a third of an acre. And most of these areas have municipal sewer and water. There are a few properties that do not. They may have one or the other. And ADUs have been allowed by right here, and detached ADUs are allowed by site plan. 4-family units are not permitted, and that goes back to the fact that not all of these units have water and sewer, and that is really important to the space need. The home here you see was built in 1982. And the addition over that garage is very well suited for an accessory dwelling unit. So you look at the driveway, 4 cars can park in that driveway. It would be very easy to put an entrance to that area over the garage onto the side of the building, a little gate in that fence. And you could have an accessory apartment there. It could be used for a family member. It could be used for rental income. And there's plenty of space in the driveway to just designate a space for that car. It wouldn't look any different from the street or to the neighbors for this to be essentially 2 housing units rather than 1. So ADUs can be up to 50% of the primary structure. So behind that garage, there's a family room, another bathroom. It could easily be a 2-story apartment and still maintain the single family home. So there's a lot of these already in existence in town. You don't even know that they're there, but the people that are living in them are part of our community and great parts of their neighborhood. And financially, it's helping everyone. It's helping the homeowner to better afford their home. It's helping the tenant to better afford housing in a great community. If we go on to our R25 zone, this gets a little farther out. Municipal water and sewer is available to very few properties. Most of the properties that have municipal water services, because we take our water from MDC. So there's a pipe that runs down through Glastonbury to provide that to the community. If you can look on the right-hand side of this home, you'll see a little blue and white pipe. That's an indication that they're on a well. And behind this house, between the house and the tree line, is a septic system. So ADUs are permitted by right, and detached ADUs and 2 families are allowed by site plan here. 4 families are not, but it's because of this private well and septic service. This home was built in 1945, and so the well and septic that are in place there are enough to service what is a 3-bedroom home, but the current health code would not have it be compatible for new construction, nor would it be compatible for conversion to a 2-family. So that would require them to expand the septic capacity and probably move the well because the proximity is too close. So as you get farther out into our more rural areas without septic and water, you see that it becomes more difficult for people to be able to add, especially detached units, but even another unit that would require another bathroom or another kitchen. So then we go out into our zones, 1 acre minimum lot size. I took a picture here of the farm, Penfield Farm on Ames Hollow Road, and it looks a very bucolic scene, but the photos taken from the vantage point of a watercourse, a stream that runs through there. You see the slope, and as you drive up Ames Hollow Road and look at the sheep that are often out there, you'll see the stone walls, and that's indicative of a lot of the ledge and rock that there is in the more rural parts of our town. We're finding that in the most rural areas, the new wells coming in are now 700 to 1,000 feet deep. So it's becoming more expensive to put in wells. And the same thing with septic due to the ledge. And so multifamily housing becomes more difficult without municipal water and sewer. Accessory apartments within the structure are still allowed by right here. That's a zoning permit done in our office rather than a process in front of planning and zoning. And detached accessory dwellings are allowed by site plan. That means you have to go before the commission, although there's no public hearing. 2 and 4 family dwellings are not permitted, and that's because of the septic and the well issues. We have a lot of steep slopes, rocks and ledges are very common, and water courses. Again, when you go back and think about that zoning map and you look at those areas that have the hatch marks, those are all areas where we have water courses, and there's many, many of them in town. So if we go down to, oh, that's my last slide. So if we go back to our, our zoning regulations, I think the commission did a pretty good job of trying to utilize the resources that we have here in town as best we can. Again, we're a very, very lucky community that our community thought almost 100 years ago to put in municipal water and sewer. And that allows us to do some of the things that we've done and make it very easy. Many rural communities don't have that option. So I think our housing diversity is really a testament to the fact that planning and zoning almost 15 years ago thought of some of the same things that are coming to the forefront now. And Robbie made some great points. I think some of the changes that have been put forward are small, but they're things that would help to make housing even more diverse and more affordable in Portland. So Jeff, that's the end of my presentation, and I will let you take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. That was a very valuable local perspective. We appreciate it very much. And I can say again, the town of Portland is well served by you and your professionalism. So we look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A as well. So now we're going to move on, but we are going to keep it local. We have 2 active and engaged Portland residents who are ready to contribute to the conversation this evening. First, we have a video that was submitted by Najee Chester Payne. And then we are going to hear directly from Barry Rogers, who is with us this evening. So let's go to Najee's video. We're going to test our technical operation a bit here. So bear with us. I'm going to attempt to share Najee's video, and let's get to that here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Najee Chester Payne. I'm part of the committee. Here just to talk a little bit about myself. So I grew up in public housing, low-income housing, Chatham Court, most of my life. It's been perfect for me, actually. It's been an amazing experience. Kept a roof over my head, met new friends, made family. And, all that has been for life. It's been forever. It's been an excellent experience living up in what you call public housing, low-income housing. Living in Portland has been special because I've been able to deal with different types of races, from blacks to whites, Spanish, and I've been able to see how they live and how, maybe they're living a little differently, maybe their culture is a little different, but there's a lot of similarities. So that was excellent to grow up in. It gave me a lot of different perspectives on how people live in life. The word public, it always seems like it's not a good thing, right? We have anything that starts with public, we got that just doesn't seem top notch, right? Like public schools just doesn't seem top notch like private schools, right? Or public transportation, or public bathrooms, right? It's just not the same. Just like public housing, almost kind of degrading, say you live in public housing, like, oh, yeah, right? Like it doesn't measure up or something, I think that maybe that might be one of the things that we have to change. Have I experienced racism? Yes, I experienced racism, but you know what? The kindness of goodwill of people here in Portland really, really, really overshadow that. There's a lot of good people here in Portland, and they've helped me out so much throughout the years. I like to call them, and I heard it from other people too. I call them Portlandites. Portland Knights. That's like a special name for people who really lived here for a while, who really supplanted their roots here in Portland, and they're really part of not only living in the town but part of the community as well. I think that's awesome for us to even and have a name for something like that. So I've been through the school system, and I think the school system is excellent. It's one of the best school systems around. And now I'm raising my daughter in the same school system, and I just wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't change it for anything at all. So I've been raising my daughter by myself for her whole life. She's 13 now, and it hasn't been easy, especially considering I'm a male and she's a female, and I didn't know what to do with a child when she first came, and next thing I know it's just me and her, and it's like, whoa, what am I gonna do? So thankfully that there's a lot of good people here in Portland. I received a lot of different help. I received a lot of help from a whole bunch of different people, all different types of races, all different type of people. It's just amazing what Portland actually brings to you when you actually get involved with the community. Got me through a lot of hard times. So I had to work at Dunkin' Donuts for about 7 to 8 years, and that's a long time for a job like that. Just to work for a flexible schedule and some stability, and being able to just get me and my daughter the necessities just to live. It wasn't easy. Now I'm in a better place, and I'm a fork truck driver. I'm a trainer, personal trainer now, and I'm also a poet as well. And all three of those things have opened so many different doors that I think I would never have been able to get into if it wasn't for living in Portland, and growing up in a community such as Chatham Court. It's been excellent ride, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it every day. So with all the gifts that I received from the community, I'm the type, I like to give back. So now I'm trying to give back as much as possible. Anything and everything I can. I don't really ask for donations, although I will be soon for one of my projects that I'm working on. But as far as doing anything for the community, I usually just reach in my own pocket and try to bring it out. If I have an extra $100, extra $75, I'm bringing it out and I'm giving it back to the community, giving it back to the kids. I've done few things. I've done bingo nights, movie nights. I've done dance classes, community walks. I did part of the lunch program, you know, and you know, I'm a poet now, so you know, I've been working with the Buttonwood Tree from Middletown, and so it's like a Middletown Portland type of connection, and we're actually doing a charity event coming up, a poetry contest. It's called Let Your Conscience Free. You know, we're trying to not only do a way for people to express themselves, clear their mind, empty their heads, less stress, you know. Not only we're trying to do that, but we're trying to raise money for Oddfellows Playhouse, which actually my daughter's been part of for years, and actually they do plays, and she's the actress right now, and she's been part of the plays, and they got hit pretty hard during COVID, so I figured this would be a good way to give back to the community, because Portland and Middletown kids actually do these programs, and I thought that was a pretty good way to link both cities, both towns, you know. I thought that would be a good way. I can only do so much, so you know, when it actually gets going, I'm going to be reaching out, and hopefully there's a few people who would be able to help the process go along. So right now I'm actually in the process of looking for a house, but unfortunately Portland is a little expensive to live in, so you know, my options are pretty low. Only because I'm actually trying to do it by myself, but that's why I'm in this committee, and maybe we can figure something out. Maybe there's something on its way. Maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Who knows? Maybe we won't make a difference. Maybe we will. But I'm just trying to do my part. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Najee, for speaking from the heart. Appreciate that very much. It was a very valuable piece of this conversation this evening, and I think I can use some of those personal training lessons, so I'll follow up on that front. Now we're going to switch gears here and kick it over to Barry Rogers, who's with us on the Zoom here this evening for some remarks from his end. Barry, good evening. Great to have you with us.
Hi, how's everybody?
Doing great.
My name is Barry, and I'm glad to be here tonight to speak with everyone. About myself, I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, Plaza Drive area. Went through the schools of Middletown Elementary, graduated from high school in 1989. In 2000, I moved here. My oldest son was about 6 months old, and we moved to Chatham Court in November of that year. And at the time I was 29, sorry to get my age out, but living in public housing, living in Chatham Court, I did a lot of volunteer work here. We used to have block parties, we used to have bike-a-thons, you know, a lot of things, and I used to participate in all of that. And I didn't realize that there was a life outside of Chatham Court, just living here. I always thought there was the grocery store and Cumberland Farms and the post office. And it wasn't until my oldest son started going to Valley View School in kindergarten, and that's when I started meeting people who did not live in the neighborhood. And my son became friends with their kids, and you know, I got to meet a lot of great people who I call friends today. I also started taking part in volunteering for schools. Right now, I am vice president of PTO at Brownstone School, and I was on the PTO at Gildersleeve, and I participated in a lot of things, and especially when my youngest was born. He's 11 years old now. Living in Portland is one of the greatest things because I love the schools. It's hard to, you know, be in like Najee said, in public housing, because sometimes you get looked down upon where you live and where you're from. And that's a hard thing. But I try to make the most of it. Just doing what I can for the community, doing what I can for my kids. Well, my oldest is now 21. He just turned 21. So I'm trying to be the best father I can be. At one point, I was a stay-at-home dad, and I went to school, and I also became a resident care aide, and that's been hard for the past year because of COVID, working in healthcare. That's been the most, I don't know, it was a very hard thing to do, still is. It was, hard to go out, go to work and, see a lot of things happening at work and then coming home and, you know, it was kind of depressing. But right now, just like Najee, I am looking for a house. And yes, Portland is very expensive. I've always wanted to live in a house and raise my kids in the house, but it never was, an option because of pricing and everything like that. It's very hard to find some place, other than public housing. And I love public housing, with the neighborhood that I'm in. It's not as diverse as it used to be, but we make the most of it. And that's the best thing to do. And I've raised both of my boys out here, and both of my kids have friends out here. And right now, I am just looking for them to have, to be able to have an option, for me to be able to leave something to them, you know, so that they can pass on to their kids and to their kids. That's one thing I'm looking for. I'm also hoping that, other families will come to Portland and be able, to afford affordable housing so that they can raise their kids here as well. Because I think Portland is a great place to live. Everything about it. And like I said, I've met some great people here. And it's awesome. I wouldn't change anything for it. Nothing.
Great stuff, Barry. Thank you so much for that perspective. We're really grateful for it. So that wraps up our panelist portion here this evening. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much for the time you put into your presentation, into your comments. I think they're very, very well received. Now we're going to move into the Q&A portion here. I have a lot of direct messages to me through the chat here, a couple of kind of low-hanging fruit here that we'll get out of the way. Robbie, I imagine it's easy for you to provide sample letters to members of the General Assembly for either 1024 or any other initiatives coming out of your end. Is that fair to say?
That's right. Yeah. So on our website, desegregatect.org/take-action, there's all sorts of sample material and also speaking and writing tips so that people can, reach out however is most accessible for them to their legislators.
Understood. Thank you. We have a pretty detailed question that I'm going to get to in a moment, but there's another one here. It's more of a fundamental question, and I think Mary and Robbie can both weigh in, and Barry certainly, if he's interested, can. What is the current definition of affordable housing? How do you define affordable housing? Robbie, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and Mary can chime in as well. I think affordable housing is one of those words that, as Najee and Barry talked about, there are a lot of misconceptions and preconceived notions around it. But in Portland, affordable housing refers just to any housing that is restricted to people who are at 80% of the area median income level. So I'm not up to date entirely on what median income in Portland is, but I think in reality, many more people actually qualify for quote unquote affordable housing than they think do. That rate varies within towns across Connecticut. Some towns will set it at 50% of area median income. Some will set it at 70. Some may even set it at 30. But in reality, I think one important distinction is that we shift away from this idea of luxury housing and of affordable housing, and we talk instead about market rate housing and income restricted housing, because that I think offers a much more useful framework for thinking about the current state of housing in our state and maybe where we need to go as well.
Mary, care to follow up on the
Sure.
definition
So
question?
I'll jump in because, Robbie's correct. We handle all the numbers here at the office. And so affordable housing is 80% of your area median income. The area median income for Portland is $99,292. So the 80% affordable is, let's see, $79,433.60. That is an amazingly high number. And when you look at the number of town employees, teachers, police officers in this town, they do not start at $79,000 a year. So just something simple as municipal employees qualify for affordable housing subsidies. So Robbie mentioned the different kind of striations that they have. So 79,000 is the 80% number. You go down to the 60% number is $56,000. So 60% of our mean income is $56,000 a year. And then you get down even lower and you get to 30%, which is $50,000 a year. So if you look at somebody spending 30% of their annual wage, that's $1,250 a month. That's what we are, that's sort of our median average price for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit is $1,250. So it would take $50,000 a year to afford that. But as we always talk about here in the office, there's so many other financial pressures in the world today. If you could take your $50,000 salary and just focus on your $1,250 a month rent, it would be great. But people are paying anywhere from $400 to $700, $800 a month for health insurance. And then you have the cost of transportation. And it just becomes impossible for people to afford housing. These are not people that are not working hard. These are just people that are stuck with rising costs and in a lot of cases, stagnant wages and a lot of competition for the same units. Both Barry and Najee reference, kind of that there's a stigma with living in public housing. And I really want to dispel that because affordable units are all over our town. So public housing units, those housing units that are at Chatham Court and Corey Heights, are considered affordable housing units. And I had an aunt that lived at Corey Heights from the time it opened. She was there about 12 years. And it was a great sense of community. It was a good bunch of people. They're great people to volunteer. But to dispel that stigma, so streets that have affordable housing units designated by the state and recognized as affordable in Portland include Airline Avenue, Barn Circle, Brush Pasture Lane, Commerce Street, Evergreen Avenue, Fairview Street, High Street, Job's Gate, Freestone Avenue, Marlborough Street, Main Street, Portland Cobalt Road, Penny Corner Road, Strongs Avenue, Summer Street, Sand Hill Road, Riverside Street, and William Street. These people are your neighbors. They're your friends. They're the people that help you shovel your sidewalk in the winter and mow your lawn if you're away on vacation, or pick up your mail or water your plants or bring your dog home. These are our neighbors. These are the people that are part of our community. It's not rich or poor. It's quite honestly luck. And if you're lucky enough to have a good paying job that wasn't hit by the pandemic, that's great. But for a lot of people, we found out in this last year how quickly your financial security can erode. I do want to just touch on, Robbie talked about home equity, and there's a concept in accounting and finance called generational wealth. And it's just what Barry talked about. You want to leave something for your kids. And the way to do that is home equity. One of the things that we're missing in our housing options are deed restricted affordable units. And what those do is they allow people to buy a home and the deed is restricted. When they go to sell, they split that equity with the agency that helped them buy that house. And they take that equity and they move into another home and they build more equity. And it's a way for people to really get some financial stability. So I'm thrilled, Barry, thank you so much, and Najee for participating tonight. But I want people to know that affordable units aren't limited to our 2 housing developments in town. They're everywhere. They're your neighbors and they're on streets throughout our community.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Robbie, for that good data and those thoughts. Very valuable here. 2 more questions that came into the chat. I think one probably most appropriate for Robbie, then one for Mary, and then I want to get one to Barry as well. So let's start, Robbie. This one, quite frankly, is a bit of a challenging question to you, so I throw it over to you. As I understand it, These law changes would increase the ability and capacity to rent out currently owned locations. That would increase wealth of landowners and very likely increase wealth gaps, would it not?
I'm a little bit unfamiliar with maybe the specific proposals that this person is referencing. I think it's important to note maybe that there are certain opportunities for homeowners to rent out properties. I think ADUs serve as a great example. Yes, they are very well suited for elderly people and for young people, but also for regular middle-aged parents who are looking to supplement their incomes. That they offer a great option. With regards to the rest of the question, I'm not totally sure what the person is referring to. But I think, broadly speaking, any efforts to provide more housing that is affordable for people of lower and middle incomes in currently high income areas would do a lot to break down barriers to public resources and public education that are the biggest drivers of inequality in our state.
Understood. Thank you, Robbie. And we'll make sure there's ample opportunity for follow-up with our panelists this evening. This next one, Mary, I think is more of a question specific to Portland. There's some initialisms in there, so bear with me. The current Portland zoning regulations restrict ADUs in RR zones to 800 square feet. This is not enough for a young family and somewhat restrictive in size. Could consideration for larger ADUs be possible?
It could, and that's largely dependent on the fact that in our rural residential zone, every unit has septic and well. So septic capacity is really what determines how big a unit can be. Septic systems are designed based on the number of bedrooms in a house. So that's outside of the town's control. That goes to the Chatham Health District. So if a home is designed for 4 bedrooms and they want to convert, we'll say, an empty garage space, and you add a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and you add an additional bedroom, your septic capacity is undersized for that. So the 800 square foot limit is really designed to allow more people to be able to convert under the regulations and do that without triggering them having to do expensive septic upgrades. So it goes back to State Department of Public Health regulation, which for septic system ties to the number of bedrooms, not square feet. So anytime you're adding bedroom units, you have to have additional septic capacity. And if the septic was only built for the size of that home, then converting a portion of the property, say a basement or a large rec room addition, and adding bedrooms requires added septic capacity.
Very true. Thank you very much, Mary. It's interesting, even in chamber conversations, how often it comes back to infrastructure, and that's certainly the case here this evening. So Barry, a couple for you, if you don't mind. They're related, so bear with me. I'm going to throw a few at you, and you answer as you see fit. But do you know people who are on waiting lists for public housing? Can you talk about the needs of folks who are struggling to find affordable housing? You referenced it a bit in your remarks. And what do you think, from kind of a more general perspective, the town of Portland can do to be more inclusive in regard to housing and related issues?
As far as knowing anybody, who's on a list or anything like that, I wouldn't know. That information wouldn't be given to me because that's the office part of it. So they would know, the housing authority themselves would know. If you heard someone say they're on a list, that that's the only way you would find out. If someone said, hey, I've been on the list for, Chatham Court or whatever, do you know what number I am? And no, we wouldn't know that. That would be, the office. And what was the other question that you asked?
Just in general, what do you believe the town can do to be more inclusive in regard to housing and related issues? That's the question that came in.
Oh boy. I mean, they could offer something that offer more information on what we could do to get, more housing. That's what I would want to see. How can I get, be able to get this house? What do I have to do to, kind of move on from where I am? That's what I would like to see the town do more of.
Understood. Very good. And I think maybe this conversation this evening can kind of serve as the foundation for that information sharing moving forward. Okay, I think we have time for a few more, and I'll certainly take a signal from Liz or anyone else in charge here this evening, but I'm planning to go till about 8:15 unless told otherwise. So this one can go to any of our panelists this evening. Does housing availability in neighboring communities affect Portland? How do issues like this affect the overall housing crisis in our state? So kind of going beyond the borders of the town of Portland into neighboring towns and perhaps throughout Middlesex County. Mary, you want to take that one first?
So I'll grab that one, Jeff. Affordable housing calculations and statistics are developed by town or by zip code. So they look at affordable housing. The 10% goal that we have is based on the number of housing units we have, and then how many units either receive assistance, use Section 8 vouchers, or somehow deed restricted as affordable. We have 349 units, that's 8.56%. And on paper, it looks like we're doing a good job. So you would look at it and you say, okay, 8.56% of our units are affordable, but that doesn't really capture the market. So people are looking for housing units in employment centers. They want to be close to their job. And there's always been a connection between Portland and Middletown. It goes back hundreds of years. There's families that have crossed the bridge daily. It goes back to the quarries. People lived in Middletown and took a ferry to Portland for work. So there is a demand for rental units, and that a lot of that demand comes from Middletown. We do get some kind of crossover. People that are looking in East Hampton will also look in Portland. But you know, low and moderate income earners are seeking the same things that higher income earners seek. They want safety, they want good schools, they want a sense of community, they want municipal amenities like a good library and town parks. They're looking at churches, they're looking at trails, and Portland has that. So the demand for housing is coming from all different zip codes because people see a community and they get a great community feel and they want to be a part of that. But affordable housing calculations are based on a specific zip code or a specific community. So neighboring communities do really impact our housing availability, and they make it more difficult for people that are living here to be able to move. Say you want to move from a smaller apartment to a larger apartment. There's more pressure because there's more demand. And if you're looking to buy a home, there's more demand because it's not just people from your community looking, it's people from neighboring communities that want to be a part of it.
Very good, Mary. Thank you very much. This next one, I think you both can weigh in on here. It deals with property values. If buildings in my neighborhood are made available to people of differing income levels, how does that affect or impact my property value?
So property value is not determined based on the income of an occupant of a home. There's a multitude of factors that go into determining property value. Comparative sales are number one. So if you're looking to buy a home, Zillow or your real estate agent is going to use comparative sales. They're going to look for prices paid for similar properties. And property value is done by towns. They go out and they assess all the properties in towns, and they look at things like the condition of the structure, how well it's maintained, type of accessory structures that are on the lot. Does it have a garage? Does it have a shed? What's the access to public utilities like sewer and water? What's the underlying land building? What's the building replacement cost? So allowing people of different income levels into your neighborhood doesn't change the value of your property.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I agree with everything Mary said. And additionally, you know, we don't have a ton of research on the impact of, you know, low income and middle income people on property values, but we do have a lot of research on is the effect that multifamily housing development has on neighboring single family property values. And that multifamily housing is often mixed income. So there might be, you know, 20% of units that are income restricted to 30% of area median income, another 20% that are 80%, and then the other 60% are market rate. And what we have found through countless studies, many of which are available on desegregatect.org, is that the creation of multifamily housing is usually an indicator of increased community revitalization and increased community investment. And it's for that very reason that the creation of multifamily housing usually signifies more demand for the neighborhood, which actually is usually correlated with an increase in property values, if not a negligible difference, but never a decrease. So it's a great question, and often a common misconception about the creation of multifamily housing, which in fact appreciates home values for single family homeowners.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're at 8:15, but the questions are coming in strong. And as long as everybody's willing to hang in for a few more minutes, I think we'll keep going. So moving right along here, this next one deals with incentives with respect to taking good care of buildings and properties and landscapes. And the direct question is, can local municipal officials force or incentivize landlords of rental units to take better care of their buildings and landscapes? Pretty straightforward.
So I guess that one would be me. Housing is a commodity, and so the cost is largely driven by the market. And rental housing investors often acquire a property with an idea of a target rate of return in mind. So rental income minus expenses like property taxes, insurance, water, sewer, utilities, and maintenance gives them their rate of return. Costs related to needed repairs are usually prioritized over things like aesthetics and landscaping. So you can generally break rental housing into two types. There's owner occupied and then there's managed properties. Landlords who are owners and residents of the same dwelling unit generally take better care because they're there all the time. So if, you know, a gutter falls off a house or a tree starts to die, that's their home where they live and they see it, and they prioritize that repair. Somebody that might be an absentee landlord will put it on a list of things to get done, but there's priorities for other repairs and other things to be done. So both types of properties have local building and fire codes that need to be enforced. So things like water, I'm trying to think, bathrooms, kitchens, stairwells, fire doors, access, fire alarms, smoke detectors, those are the kind of things that get enforced. Portland also has a blight ordinance that is enforced by really the police department rather than the zoning department because it's an ordinance. So there are things that you can do from a regulatory perspective to help make sure that units are maintained and that they're safe. But things like landscaping, other than unless grass gets too tall or something that occurs to the level of blight, there really isn't a lot of control because that's somebody's personal taste, what they think is attractive or what they think is easily maintained. So it's definitely something you can look at and how we can incentivize. You know, it's kind of the carrot and the stick. If you can give somebody a goal and make it attractive to them, they'll often perform. So, you know, that's something that we can look at.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mary. I think we're going to go to a bit of a lightning round here, if you don't mind. I'm going to group these questions together. Robbie, first for you, and again, we're going to go beyond the borders a little bit here. But Robbie, what suggestions do you have for a town like Portland for ways that the town can be more inclusive? And can you share any specific examples of other small towns throughout the state that you've worked with that have been successful? And then we'll go to Mary for a different question. Robbie, examples from throughout the state.
You know, that's a tricky question. I think, you know, obviously I deal specifically with zoning and with housing. And the most successful sorts of projects that have led to integration are ones where people take a mixed income approach to housing. I think, you know, the kind of developments like we're starting to see in neighboring Hamden, there's one going up. I live in New Haven. In both sides, both towns that border New Haven of Milford and Hamden have both constructed mixed use residences in downtown areas. And it's that kind of putting people in the center of a community in a place where they can access all of the resources and shops and schools is a way to really foster integration and community values. And then beyond that, I think, you know, from a more personal and emotional level, attending the kinds of community events like these, reading books about the history of segregation and systemic racism are incredibly valuable and generally perspective altering. So there's both an institutional and a housing component to integration, and also I think a personal and a moral one as well. And both are especially relevant today.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Barry, quickly for you, if you don't mind, Do you believe that there are myths out there about public housing that you wish people realized that were untrue, that perhaps are permeated throughout the communities of our great state here? And what message do you have to those folks who are carrying on those myths that, quite frankly, are not true?
Oh, yes, definitely. There's always the stigma that because you live in public housing, um, that you live in a ghetto, you are in a bad neighborhood, you might even be a bad person. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Where I live, there are some very hardworking people here. And we do everything just to survive. There's not, people going out and causing trouble. There is that stigma when you tell somebody where you're from, that you're from Chatham Court, they immediately go and say, oh, they look at you like, okay, you must be a troublemaker, or your kid must be a troublemaker, or anything like that. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. I mean, you always have a bad apple in every neighborhood you encounter. But here, there's some very hardworking and great people here. And that's what needs to be put out there. And I want to be the one to put it out there for you all.
That's great, Barry. Just a quick, very quick follow-up. I have here, what can the citizens of Portland do to be more welcoming to families who are coming into town and renting affordable apartments? And it sounds like making you kind of the point person or the liaison may be a great first step. So any additional thoughts on what town folk can do to make these their fellow residents more comfortable here?
Be more accepting of it. I mean, like I said, when I moved here, like I said, I didn't realize there was a life outside of Chatham Court. But like I said, once my son started going to schools, I started meeting different people. And, like I said, I call them friends to this day. And I think anybody in town that feels threatened by it or whatever, they need to be more accepting to it.
No question about it, Barry. Thank you very much for those thoughts. Switching gears here quickly, back to you, Mary. You're obviously involved in a lot of regional organizations, including the Chamber, which I appreciate, and also the RiverCog, the Lower Connecticut Valley Council of Governments. Do you have any examples or any knowledge of the RiverCog process with respect to the regional plan for affordable housing and how that might impact Portland's discussions moving forward?
So Jeff, I sit on that committee. We have a regional planning committee, and the regional planning committee is charged with Connecticut General Statute 8-30J, which requires every town to have an affordable housing plan. And just as I discussed before, housing plans can't be put together in silos. There's influences from neighboring communities on all sides. They're centered around employment. Middletown is somewhere around 22% affordable. And it's just not enough because the jobs here are not paying enough for people to be able to afford, especially young people starting out in their careers. So the Council of Governments recognized that, and they came up with a plan. Instead of each individual town doing their Section 8-3J plan themselves, and Portland creating an affordable housing plan for Portland that really kind of ignores outside influences, the COG has gone out and worked with all of our towns. So there's 17 towns in our regional council, and they're going to put together a regional affordable housing plan. And each of those independent towns will have their own chapter that will look specifically at strengths and weaknesses in their community and look at ways that they can help. But they're going to holistically look at our region. And I think it's a great way to approach affordable housing. It'll allow them to identify employment centers. It'll allow them to identify commuting times and where we can best locate housing that's going to serve those employment centers. And I just think it's a wonderful idea. So over the summer, we will be holding some charrettes and some public meetings. They're going to be on Zoom, so everyone is welcome. And the more opinions and ideas that we get, the better it is. If anybody is on Facebook, we have the Portland, Connecticut Marketplace that's run by the Economic Development Commission. All of those meetings will be posted there. RiverCog posts them on their Facebook page as well. Notices will go into the River East news bulletin that everybody gets on Fridays in their mailboxes. And so we're looking to get as much participation we can, not just in Portland, but across the entire region. And I think it's really a testament to the type of planning that our regional council does, that they saw this need to be something that is regional rather than independent for the towns. And they kind of took the ball and ran with it.
Perfect, Mary. Thank you so much. So I think we'll close right here with this last question, and maybe a bit redundant, so feel free to kind of treat it also as a closing statement. Please be brief if you can, because we're coming up against our closing hour here. But I think it's a pretty straightforward question. How does a community benefit from having fair housing choices? And please include social, economic, and cultural benefits if you can. Let's start with Barry for some closing thoughts if you can, sir.
Just simple, it brings people together as far as I'm concerned. That's it. That's the best thing to see, bringing people together. That's my short answer for that.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Barry. Robbie, how about you?
I couldn't agree more with Barry. And I think, there's evidence that integration itself is something that's valuable for a community. Psychologists have done longitudinal studies where they track African-American children who grow up in segregated communities and those who grow up in diverse and integrated, often, 50 to 60% white communities. And the children who grow up in integrated communities perform better in their lives, despite controlling for income level existing and wealth level of the family. There are, benefits to having diverse viewpoints in a room. And beyond that, I think I believe very, very passionately that I think wholeheartedly in the concept of equal opportunity. And I think that especially when we're talking about an issue like housing, where there are so many explicitly racist practices of the past, we have a kind of a moral responsibility to undo those. So that's my motivation behind the work that I do, and I hope many others as well.
Good, Robbie. Thank you very much. And Mary, for some final thoughts from your end, please.
From my end, from the town perspective, we don't ask our citizens how much money they make or where they're from. They're residents of our community. And every resident is important. Portland is one of those towns where if you have a problem, everyone pulls together. I look at the number of volunteers we have at our food bank, at our library, for our kids' events, for sports, for schools. Who don't we need? We need everybody. And we need to stop thinking in terms of rich versus poor and start looking at each other as residents of the same community. Portland is a tight-knit group. And anybody that comes in and is willing to, be a part of our community and volunteer is always welcome. And so I think the more housing opportunity we can provide, I think the better community we will be and the stronger community we will be. And bottom line is, there was a study done a few years ago called Grow Smart. And that was done by the Regional Council of Governments. And they identified populations that we're losing. We're losing young adults. Young people cannot stay in the community they grew up in. That, to me, is sad. Older folks that want to age in place can't afford to stay in their homes. That's sad. To spend a lifetime volunteering and being part of a community, and then you reach an age where you can't afford to stay there anymore. Robbie's right. It's a moral imperative that we just welcome everyone into our community. And we can do a lot as a town by providing housing options and allowing people to be able to spend their lives here no matter what happens. When they're starting out in their careers, if they lose a job, if they get a better job and they want to buy a bigger house, or they want to move, or they want to have more children, or they want to have grandma or grandpa move in and age in place with them, it builds community and it strengthens the fabric of our community.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you all for doing a wonderful job this evening. It's been a pleasure for me to be a part of this conversation. I will kick it back to Christy here, but please know that me personally and our chamber continues to stand with you as a constructive community partner. So we're grateful for the opportunity. Have a great night, everyone. Back to you, Christy.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and all of our panelists. I dropped into the chat some links for follow-up questions and also a brief evaluation form that we'd love to get your feedback on. And now for the credits. Again, thanks to our moderator and our panelists for sharing their knowledge and their expertise, as well as our co-sponsors, the Portland Library and the Town of Portland. A special thanks also goes out to our first select woman, Susan Bransfield, who has been extremely supportive of the Portland Social Justice Coalition and of our Fair Housing Matters panel from the very beginning. And also to the library director, Jen Nocek. She jumped right on board at the coalition's conception, collaborating with us to create the Portland Forum, a library discussion group centered on the themes of diversity and social justice. You can register for those discussions on the library's website. In particular, we'd like to thank Caroline Murray and the other former members of the diversity group who had the idea for tonight's panel. We are so glad to have helped bring it to life. Thank you to all of the members of the Coalition's Fair Housing Committee and for all of your ideas, time, and effort that went into this. Our thanks go out to April Graves and Erin Livensparger, two of the Coalition's founding members, and specifically in context of tonight's event to Liz Habino. In particular, she is the type of person who makes things happen. I can't possibly overstate her importance in the Coalition. Also, a big thanks to everyone in attendance tonight. When planning something like this, you never know how much of an audience there will be. We are so grateful to see how many people in our community care enough about fair housing to show up tonight. We're very interested in your ideas, thoughts, and feedback, so don't forget to fill out that survey. We're planning a follow-up event for later this year, so watch for more information about that. Thanks again and have a wonderful night.